The first time I saw Hudson, he was standing in the middle of a nearly empty parking lot beside an overloaded hatchback that looked like it had finally given up. One of the rear tires had blown out. The back of the car was packed so full that a guitar case, a coffee maker, and 3 cardboard boxes were visible through the rear window. A bicycle was strapped to the roof with ropes that looked older than the car itself. I almost kept driving. Almost. But there was something about the way he stood there that made me slow down. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't frustrated. He just looked tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that settles into your shoulders after you've spent too long pretending everything is fine. I pulled my pickup onto the shoulder about 30 feet ahead and got out. "You okay?" I asked. He looked up, blinking like he'd forgotten other people existed. "Honestly, yeah. No." That made me laugh. "I appreciate the honesty." He smiled for the first time. It was small but genuine. "I'm Reid. Hudson." I walked over to the car. "Flat tire. One completely destroyed tire. You have a spare?" "I have something that claims to be a spare." He opened the trunk. Buried beneath half his life was the smallest emergency tire I'd ever seen. "I don't know much about cars," he admitted. "I noticed. I figured." I crouched beside the wheel while Hudson awkwardly moved boxes out of the way so I could reach the jack. For a few minutes we worked mostly in silence. Then I asked the obvious question. "Moving?" He looked at the mountain of belongings inside the car. "Is it that obvious? I've seen people relocate with less." He laughed. "Yeah." "Where to?" He hesitated. "Across the country." I looked up. "Seriously?" He nodded. "That's about 28 hours from here." "I know." "You doing it alone?" That was the plan. Something about the way he said it made me ask another question. "And now?" He looked toward the highway stretching endlessly ahead. "I guess now the plan includes a flat tire." 20 minutes later we had the spare installed. It looked terrible. It would get him to the next town. Maybe. Hudson handed me a bottle of water from a cooler buried behind his passenger seat. "I owe you." "You don't." "I do." "You don't." He leaned against the car. "I don't even know why I'm doing this." "The tire. The move." That answer surprised me. "You've already packed everything." "I know. You've clearly committed." "I thought I had." I studied him for a second. He looked maybe my age. Late 20s? No. Closer to 24. Then he corrected me before I could ask. "I'm 26. I laughed. "I wasn't going to guess." "You looked like you were." "I'm 27. "So you're winning." "Apparently." He took a long drink of water. "I quit my job." "Okay." "Ended my lease." "Makes sense." "Sold almost everything I owned." I nodded. "So why do you look like you're about to drive back instead?" He stared at the road for several seconds. "Because I realized this morning." He stopped. "I don't actually know anyone where I'm going." That sentence landed differently. People moved all the time. For work. For relationships. For family. But there was something lonely about the way he said it. "So why there?" "I got offered a position." "What kind?" "Graphic design." "Nice. It starts in 9 days." "You've got time." "I have just enough time to panic." I couldn't argue with that. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever make a decision that made perfect sense until the exact moment it became real?" I nodded immediately. "Yeah." "What happened?" "I didn't take it." "Regret it?" "Sometimes." He looked at me with quiet curiosity. "What was it?" "Seattle." "You almost moved?" "Job offer." "What stopped you?" "My dad got sick." "I'm sorry." "He got better." "That's good." "It is. But by then the opportunity was gone." Hudson nodded slowly. "I almost wish something had stopped me." I looked at him. "I don't." He frowned. "Why?" "Because then it wouldn't really be your choice." He didn't answer. Instead he looked at the spare tire. "I should probably get to the next town before this thing explodes too." "Probably." He opened his driver's door, then stopped. "You hungry?" I blinked. What? I know a diner about 10 minutes from here. I thought you were in a hurry. I am. But you've been under my car for half an hour. I'll survive. I'd feel better buying you lunch. You don't owe me lunch. I know. He smiled again. I just don't really want to eat alone. The diner was exactly what you'd expect from a highway town. Old booths, coffee that had probably been sitting there since sunrise, a waitress who somehow already knew half the customers by name. Hudson ordered pancakes at nearly 2 in the afternoon. I respect the confidence, I said. Breakfast food has no schedule. I can't argue with that. I ordered a burger. For a while conversation stayed light. Music, road trips, bad coffee, the strange things people packed when they moved. I brought 3 lamps, Hudson admitted. 3. I don't even like lamps. Then why? I got emotionally attached during packing. I laughed. I think moving breaks people's brains. I cried over a frying pan. A frying pan? It wasn't even a good frying pan. We both laughed harder than the joke deserved. It felt surprisingly easy, like talking to someone I'd somehow skipped the awkward introduction stage with. Eventually I asked, "So, what's waiting for you? In the new city?" "Yeah. A small apartment. Friends? No. Family? No. Anyone?" He shook his head. "Just HR expecting me Monday week." That sounded heavier than he'd intended. "And here?" I asked. "What are you leaving behind?" He stirred his coffee without drinking it. "My parents moved overseas." "Okay. My sister lives 4 states away." "Friends?" He smiled weakly. "Most of them stopped feeling like friends after college." "And?" He looked out the window. "Someone I stayed with too long." I didn't push. He noticed anyway. "No dramatic breakup." "Okay. We were just making each other smaller." That sentence stayed with me. Making each other smaller. I figured leaving was easier than trying to become someone else in the same town. I nodded slowly. "I get that. You do. Different reasons." He looked interested. "My whole life's been here." "That sounds nice." Sometimes. Sometimes. Sometimes staying somewhere your whole life means everyone only knows the version of you from 10 years ago. He smiled. "That actually makes sense. No matter what changes, they still think you're 17. "Exactly." He laughed quietly. "I've been trying to become someone new. And I don't know if driving farther automatically makes that happen." "No, it doesn't." We sat with that for a moment. Then Hudson suddenly asked, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I frowned. "Working. And after work? Probably nothing." He looked almost embarrassed before speaking. "This is going to sound weird. It probably will. My spare tire isn't making it across 3,000 miles. Definitely not. I need to buy 4 new tires." "Makes sense. I also need somebody to tell me if I'm getting ripped off." I smiled. "So you want car advice?" "I want adult supervision. I don't know if I'm qualified." "You changed a tire in 10 minutes. Fair." He looked down at his coffee. "I know we literally just met." "Yeah. But," he shrugged, "you seem trustworthy." I don't know why those words mattered. Maybe because he said them without trying to flatter me. Like it was simply an observation. "I can help." His shoulders visibly relaxed. "Really? Sure. Thanks." "No problem." Then neither of us realized that one simple trip to buy tires would become the beginning of a journey neither of us had planned. The tire shop opened at 8. I got there at 7:55. Hudson was already waiting. His hatchback was parked crookedly in the lot, somehow looking even more overloaded in daylight. He stood outside with a paper cup of coffee and looked like he'd barely slept. "You've been here long?" I asked. 20 minutes. Nervous. He looked toward the car. I kept imagining the spare exploding on the drive over. It survived. So did I. "Congratulations." He smiled. "You really came. You asked." "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would." "I know." He hesitated. "I guess I'm still getting used to people meaning that." That stayed with me longer than it should have. The mechanic circled the car once before whistling. You're taking this thing somewhere? East Coast, Hudson answered. The mechanic looked at the tires. Not on these, you're not. Hudson glanced at me. I figured. The mechanic disappeared into the office to print estimates. Hudson leaned against the counter. I've never bought tires before. Really? My last car came with new ones. You've had an easy life. I've had a lucky life. Different thing. He nodded. Yeah. A few minutes later, the mechanic returned. Hudson looked at the number. His face fell immediately. That's a lot. He nodded. I knew it'd be expensive, but not that expensive. The mechanic started explaining different brands, different warranties, different mileage guarantees. Hudson looked completely overwhelmed. I interrupted. What would you put on your own car? The mechanic stopped talking. He looked at me for a second, then pointed at the middle option. These. Why? Because they're actually worth the money. I nodded. We'll take those. Hudson looked relieved before he'd even signed anything. Outside, while they worked on the car, we walked to a nearby park. There wasn't much there. A few benches, a baseball field, children playing somewhere in the distance. We sat under a tree. Hudson finally admitted something. I almost canceled the move. This morning. Last night. What changed? You answered your phone. I laughed. You didn't call me. I almost did. You have my number because you wrote it on the receipt yesterday. I'd forgotten. In case the spare gave out. It almost did. He looked at the ground. I kept thinking. He smiled awkwardly. If the only person I know within 500 miles answers, maybe I'll keep driving. I looked at him. You barely know me. I know. That doesn't concern you? A little. But you've never once acted like helping me was inconvenient. I didn't know what to say to that. Around noon, we loaded the new tires with another problem. The roof straps looked terrible. I stared at the bicycle tied on top. Those ropes are older than both of us. They came with the car. They're trying to kill your bike. So, new straps. One store turned into three. Three turned into an hour. By the end of it, we'd bought ratchet straps, a phone mount, windshield washer fluid, jumper cables, snacks, and somehow an insulated travel mug Hudson insisted I needed. You don't need to buy me things. I know. So stop. You fixed my entire moving plan. I pointed at tires. You also prevented my bicycle from becoming highway decoration. I'd like to avoid that. I would too. He handed me the mug anyway. Consider it selfish. How? If you ever drive across the country, you'll think of me. I laughed. That's manipulative. A little. By late afternoon, everything was finally ready. Hudson's car actually looked capable of surviving the trip now. He closed the hatch, took one long breath. Well, I guess this is goodbye. I guess. Neither of us moved. It was strange. We'd known each other less than 24 hours, but saying goodbye felt unexpectedly difficult. Hudson finally held out his hand. Thanks, Reid. I shook it. Good luck. You too. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, rolled down the window, then stopped. You ever do something completely irresponsible? I raised an eyebrow. Depends. Like taking a week off. I laughed. I definitely can't afford that. What if you could? I still have a job. He nodded. Right? He looked disappointed in a way he tried to hide. I'll send you a picture when I get there. I'd like that. He smiled. See you. I watched him pull onto the highway. The little hatchback disappeared around the bend. And somehow the parking lot felt quieter than it had any right to. The next morning I went back to work. Or at least I tried. I repaired engines all day, talked to customers, filled out paperwork. But every time my phone buzzed, I looked. Nothing. Around noon, a message finally arrived. Hudson. Made it to Nebraska. Still alive. Attached was a picture of his car parked beside an endless stretch of highway. I smiled. Me? Congratulations. Only about 2,000 miles left. He replied almost immediately. Don't remind me. Over the next 3 days, messages became conversations. Conversations became phone calls. Phone calls became part of the day. He'd call while filling up the tank. I'd answer while closing the garage. He showed me sunsets from states I'd never visited. I showed him the stray cat that kept wandering into our shop. It became easy, dangerously easy. On the 4th evening, he sounded different. Quiet. You okay? Maybe. What happened? I'm in a motel. Okay. I've been driving for 4 days. Yeah. I realized today. He stopped talking. What? I haven't had a real conversation with anyone except you. I leaned back against my truck. Truck stop cashiers don't count? They're lovely. But no. Silence. Then he laughed quietly. This is ridiculous. What is? I've known you less than a week. Technically true. And you're somehow the first person I want to tell things to. I didn't answer immediately, because I understood exactly what he meant. Finally, I admitted, I've been looking forward to your calls too. The line stayed quiet. Then Hudson spoke so softly I almost missed it. I'm glad. Neither of us realized that the hardest part of the journey hadn't even started yet. The first sign that something was wrong came on the 6th morning. Hudson always sent a picture before he started driving. Sometimes it was coffee, sometimes the sunrise, sometimes a sign with the name of whatever tiny town he'd ended up in. That morning, nothing. I told myself he was probably sleeping in. By 9, still nothing. At 10:30, my phone finally rang. Not a text, a call. I answered before the first ring finished. Hudson. Silence. Then a sigh. Hey. Something in his voice immediately made me straighten up. You okay? Not really. What happened? My car. My stomach dropped. What about it? It stopped. Where? Middle of nowhere. Helpful. I know. You safe. I pulled off the highway. Anyone with you? No. I heard him laugh weakly. I guess this is the part where road trips become stories. What happened exactly? It started shaking. Okay. Then smoke. Okay. Then every warning light on the dashboard came on at once. I closed my eyes. Did you keep driving? No. Good. A long silence followed. Then he quietly asked, What do I do? It wasn't really about the car. I could hear it. He was exhausted, scared, completely alone. Where exactly are you? He gave me the nearest mile marker. I searched it. There was almost nothing nearby. A repair shop, 30 miles away. One motel. A gas station. That's it. I'll call around. You don't have to. I know. An hour later, I'd managed to arrange a tow truck. Hudson kept apologizing. I'm sorry. For what? You've spent more time solving my problems than I have. I don't remember volunteering. You kind of did. I know. The tow truck finally arrived while we stayed on the phone. The driver introduced himself. Hudson handed him the phone. This your brother? The man asked me. I smiled despite myself. No. Friend. I looked through the garage window at the rain beginning outside. Yeah. The driver nodded. He'll be okay. Thanks. When Hudson got the phone back, he sounded calmer. They think it's the alternator. That's fixable. I hope so. He hesitated. I'm really tired, Reid. I know. I don't think I realized how lonely driving all day would feel. You've made good time. I know. But hotels all look the same now. I leaned against my toolbox. What do you want to do? I honestly. He stopped. Want to sit in one place for a week. That evening I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because of the car. Because of his voice. People don't usually admit they're lonely. They'll say they're tired, or stressed, or frustrated. Hudson had simply said it, like he'd run out of energy to pretend otherwise. The next day, his alternator was replaced. Problem solved. Except, it wasn't. He called again around lunchtime. They fixed it. Good. I'm sitting in the parking lot. Okay. I can't make myself start driving. Why? I don't know. He laughed quietly. I've spent 6 days chasing a destination. And I don't know if I'm running towards something. His voice became smaller. Or away from everything. I didn't answer immediately, because I wasn't sure either. That night I went home and looked around my apartment. Same couch, same television, same kitchen, same routine. Every day looked exactly like the day before it. For years I'd called that stability. Suddenly, it looked a lot like standing still. The next morning my boss found me staring at the schedule. You planning a vacation? I looked up. I weren't. I don't know. He folded his arms. You've got almost 3 weeks saved. I know. You never use them. I know. You should. I laughed. That's surprisingly supportive. He shrugged. My wife says people regret working too much. Wise woman. The smartest person I know. He walked away, but his words stayed. At noon Hudson called again. Good news. You started driving? No. I laughed. That's not good news. I found the best pie I've ever had. Much better. It was worth breaking down. I'm glad your priorities are straight. We talked while he ate. About nothing. About everything. Eventually he asked, how's work? The same. You sound disappointed. I didn't think I was. He became quiet, then asked a question that caught me completely off guard. When was the last time you did something that scared you? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I genuinely couldn't answer. Hudson noticed. Reid, I don't know. I think that's your answer. That evening I packed a backpack. Not because I'd decided anything. Just to see what it felt like. A few shirts, jeans, phone charger, toothbrush. Took less than 10 minutes. I stared at the bag sitting beside the door, then laughed at myself. What am I doing? The next morning Hudson sent a photo. Not of the road, not of breakfast, just the motel parking lot. Caption, still here. I called immediately. You've officially adopted this motel. I think they know my coffee order now. So what's the plan? Silence. Then, I don't know anymore. Another silence. Longer this time. Then he quietly said, I kind of wish you were here. Those words hit harder than either of us expected. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally I asked, you mean, just to help? He laughed softly. I don't even know. Honest. Completely honest. He looked away from the camera. Haven't felt this understood in a long time. I swallowed. Neither had I. That afternoon I walked into my boss's office. He looked up from his paperwork. Everything okay? Can I ask you something? Shoot. If someone you barely knew asked you to drive across the country. He stared at me. I'd probably ask why. What if you couldn't explain it? He leaned back, then smiled. Sounds like you've already decided. I haven't. You packed already? I looked at him. How did you know? You've got that look. What look? The one people get 5 minutes before they change their lives. I laughed nervously. I think you're giving me too much credit. No. He opened the vacation calendar. I think you're finally giving yourself permission. He signed the approval form before I even finished asking. An hour later, I was loading my backpack into my truck. My hands were shaking. Hudson answered on the second ring. Hey, where are you? The motel. Stay there. Why? I smiled despite myself. Because I'm coming to help you finish the drive. Silence. Complete silence. Then, you can't be serious. I already took vacation. What? I'm about 6 hours away. Another silence. When Hudson finally spoke, his voice cracked just slightly. Reid. Yeah. Are you really doing this? I looked at the highway ahead. Yeah. For the first time in years, I had absolutely no idea where life was taking me. And somehow, that felt exactly right. I left before sunrise. Not because I was in a hurry, because I knew if I gave myself another hour, I'd start talking myself out of it. My apartment looked strangely unfamiliar as I locked the door. I'd never taken a spontaneous trip before. Every vacation I'd ever planned had involved spreadsheets, hotel comparisons, and checking the weather 3 weeks in advance. Now I had a backpack, a cooler, and a truck pointed west. Hudson called 40 minutes into the drive. I still think you're joking. I'm not. You really left. I did. You don't even know how long this is going to take. I know. What if my car breaks again? Then we'll deal with it. What if I decide not to move after all? I smiled. Then we'll deal with that too. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to thank you. You've already said thanks. I know. I don't need anything else. His voice softened. I hope you know this isn't something people usually do. I've noticed. 6 hours later, I saw the motel. It looked exactly like every other roadside motel I'd ever driven past without remembering. Hudson was sitting outside his room in a plastic chair with a notebook balanced on his knee. He looked up as my truck pulled in. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he stood. I climbed out. You actually came. I said I would. He laughed, shaking his head. I honestly expected to wake up and realize I'd imagined the whole conversation. You've got a pretty creative imagination. I do. We hugged. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Brief. Natural. When we stepped back, Hudson smiled in a way I'd never seen before. Not polite. Not relieved. Just happy. I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad too. His room was small. A suitcase sat open on the floor. A laptop rested on the desk beside sketches scattered across the surface. You draw by hand? I asked. Sometimes. He looked almost embarrassed. I mostly do digital work. I picked up one of the sketches. It was a small downtown street. Nothing dramatic. Just people walking. Coffee shops. Trees. The details were incredible. You made this. He shrugged. I get bored in hotel rooms. Hudson. What? You're really good. He smiled without looking at me. My grandmother used to say drawing was the only time I stopped overthinking. I believe her. That evening we walked to the diner across the street. It wasn't particularly good. Neither of us cared. Conversation came easily now, like we'd skipped months of getting to know each other. Somewhere between burgers and pie, Hudson asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you really come?" I took a sip of coffee. "I told you. To help me drive." "That's part of it. And the other part?" I looked out the window. "I've spent years waiting for my life to start." He stayed quiet. "I kept thinking one day something interesting would happen. And I finally realized interesting things don't usually knock on your front door." Hudson smiled. "So you came looking." "I guess I did." He stared at his coffee for several seconds. "I'm glad you found me." The next morning we reorganized everything inside his car, which mostly meant discovering how many completely unnecessary things he'd packed. "You have 2 toaster ovens." I noticed. "Why?" "I forgot I owned one." "You packed both." I was emotional. You were irrational. I've accepted that. By lunchtime we'd filled an entire donation box. 3 blankets. Old dishes. Books he'd already read twice. A blender. "You're giving away the blender?" "I've used it once." "For what?" "A smoothie." "Was it good?" "No." "Then goodbye. Blender." Hudson laughed. "I like how ruthless you are. I like how sentimental you are." He looked at me. "Really? It balances out." We finally left the motel just after 2. Hudson pulled onto the highway. I followed in my truck. For about 20 miles. Then my phone rang. It was Hudson. "This is ridiculous." "What is?" "We're talking on the phone while driving next to each other." I laughed. "Fair point. Can I make a suggestion?" "Shoot. Leave your truck at the next long-term parking lot." "What?" "Ride with me. So my truck just... We'll come back for it." I thought about it. That's incredibly impractical. I know. but I'd rather not spend another 2,000 miles talking through Bluetooth. I smiled. I'll meet you at the next exit. An hour later, my truck was parked safely at a storage lot. We transferred my backpack into Hudson's hatchback. I looked at the tiny passenger seat. You've packed your entire life. I made room. Barely. I climbed in anyway. Hudson started the engine. This feels different. Yeah. Now we're actually doing it together. The highway stretched ahead. Endless. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Not because it was awkward, because it felt surprisingly comfortable. The kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Late that afternoon, we crossed into another state. Hudson smiled at the welcome sign. I've never been here. I've never been west of home. He looked at me. So we're both improvising. Pretty much. We stopped at an overlook just before sunset. The valley below stretched for miles. Neither of us reached for our phones immediately. We just stood there. Finally, Hudson said, I thought moving was supposed to make me feel brave. And mostly it's made me feel small. I looked across the landscape. I think that's normal. You do? Yeah. The world gets bigger. He nodded slowly. I hadn't thought of it like that. After another minute, he quietly added, It doesn't feel as overwhelming now. Because you're getting used to it? He looked at me. No. Because I'm not looking at it alone. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. I didn't know how to answer. So I didn't. Some things are better left exactly as they're said. That night, we found another roadside motel. 2 rooms were available. Hudson looked at the receptionist. Then at me. Then back at the receptionist. Actually, he hesitated. 1 room is fine. I looked at him. You sure? He nodded. Feels kind of pointless pretending we're strangers. The room had 2 beds. Simple. Comfortable. We spent another hour talking before either of us turned off the lights. About childhood. Bad jobs. Favorite movies. Things we'd never done. Around midnight, Hudson spoke into the darkness. Reid. Yeah. I'm really glad my tire blew out. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. So am I. Neither of us realized that somewhere along the highway, the trip had quietly stopped being about helping a stranger move. It had become about discovering what home could feel like when it was another person beside you. By the 3rd day of driving together, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Hudson always drove the first shift. I always found the coffee. He liked the windows cracked open, even when the air was cold. I liked quiet during the first hour after sunrise. Neither of us had ever discussed any of those things. We'd simply noticed, adapted, the way people do when they actually pay attention to each other. You've started finishing my sentences. Hudson glanced over at me. I have. You ordered my breakfast this morning. You always get the same thing. That's not the point. He laughed. I wasn't even thinking about it. Exactly. He looked back at the road. I guess I'm paying attention. I smiled. I noticed. Around noon, we stopped at a scenic overlook. There wasn't much there besides a wooden fence and a view stretching across rolling hills. Hudson leaned against the railing. You know what's weird? What? I don't feel like I'm moving anymore. I frowned. You've crossed 4 states. I know. But it stopped feeling like I was leaving somewhere. He looked toward the horizon. It feels like we're just going. There was something peaceful about the way he said it. No panic. No uncertainty. Just acceptance. We bought sandwiches from a tiny grocery store in the next town. The cashier smiled at us. You boys traveling together? Hudson answered before I could. Yeah. Simple. Natural. No hesitation. The cashier nodded. Long trip. Almost done. You've picked a beautiful week for it. When we walked back outside, Hudson looked thoughtful. What? I didn't even think before answering. Answering what? Traveling together. I looked at him. Because we are. I know. He smiled. It just felt nice. That afternoon rain started falling. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to blur the windshield. Hudson turned the wipers on. I used to love driving in the rain. What changed? I always had somewhere to get. And now, he laughed quietly. Now I kind of don't want the trip to end. I looked out the side window. I know. The admission surprised both of us. We checked into another motel just after dark. This one had a little picnic area behind the building. We took our dinner outside. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine trees. Hudson stared up at the sky. I haven't looked at stars in years. You've been too busy? I've been indoors. He smiled at himself. Funny how those become the same thing. After dinner, we wandered slowly around the empty parking lot. Hudson suddenly stopped walking. Can I tell you something embarrassing? You've already admitted to crying over a frying pan. Fair. He took a breath. I almost turned around on the first day. I looked at him. Really? I got about 40 miles from my apartment. And I pulled into a gas station. He looked toward the motel lights. I sat there for almost an hour. What stopped you? I kept thinking. He smiled faintly. If I went home, nothing would actually change. I nodded. I'd still be unhappy. He looked at me. I'd just be unhappy somewhere familiar. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eventually I said, I'm glad you kept driving. So am I. Later that night, we sat outside our room with 2 paper cups of coffee. Hudson suddenly laughed. What? I just realized something. What? I don't know your favorite color. I stared at him. Seriously. We've talked for hours every day. And I don't know your favorite color. Blue. He nodded thoughtfully. Mine's green. I figured. You did. You've bought something green in every state. He blinked. Have I? Water bottle. Oh. Notebook. Right. Hoodie. He laughed. I didn't even notice. I did. He looked at me for a long second. You notice a lot. I guess I do. The next morning, we crossed another state line. Hudson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Didn't answer. You okay? My new manager. You should probably answer. I will later. You nervous? A little. What if I hate it there? I looked at him. What if you don't? He smiled. You always answer questions with questions. Only the impossible ones. Around lunchtime, traffic slowed to a crawl. Construction. We barely moved for 20 minutes. Hudson drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. I'm bored. We've been stopped for 5 minutes. I get bored efficiently. I laughed. So entertain yourself. He looked at me. Okay. What? Tell me something nobody knows. I thought about it. Then admitted. When I was 18. Yeah. I got accepted into a photography program. Hudson looked genuinely surprised. What? I never told anyone. You wanted to be a photographer? I wanted to travel. What happened? My dad convinced me it wasn't practical. You listened. I did. Do you regret it? I looked out the windshield. Sometimes. Hudson stayed quiet for a while, then softly said, I think you would have been good at it. Why? Because you notice people. I looked at him. What makes you say that? You always notice when I'm pretending I'm okay. I didn't have an answer, because he was right. That evening we reached the city where Hudson would be living. The skyline appeared slowly in the distance. Glass buildings catching the last light of sunset. Hudson's smile faded. You okay? I think so. You don't sound convinced. I spent a week trying to get here. And now, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Now I'm terrified of arriving. I understood. Because arriving meant the journey would be over. And somewhere along the road, neither of us had started measuring the trip by miles anymore. We'd started measuring it by conversations, by shared breakfasts, by quiet moments that somehow mattered more than either of us expected. As we drove toward the city lights, I caught myself wishing the highway would last just a little longer. Not because I was afraid of the destination, because I wasn't ready to stop traveling beside Hudson. And judging by the way he kept glancing at me before looking back at the road, neither was he. The apartment looked better in person than it had in the photos. Small, bright, Third floor. Old brick building with plants hanging from several balconies. Hudson parked in front and just sat there. The engine idled. Neither of us reached for the door. So, he exhaled slowly. I live here now. You do. It still doesn't feel real. It probably won't today. He nodded. I guess not. Moving everything upstairs took almost 3 hours. The elevator was out of service. Of course it was. Hudson looked up the staircase after carrying the first box. I own too many things. I've been telling you that for days. You were right. I know. By the 10th trip, we were both laughing every time we passed each other on the stairs. Kitchen stuff. Living room. Books. More books. I like books. You have enough to start a library. He shrugged. They make a place feel lived in. When the last box finally made it upstairs, Hudson collapsed onto the empty living room floor. I don't think I can move. You'll have to. Eventually. I handed him a bottle of water. He accepted it with an exaggerated sigh. This officially counts as moving. I think carrying your entire life up 3 flights of stairs qualifies. He laughed. I'm promoting you from road trip companion to moving crew. Any pay? You already ate the pizza. Fair enough. The apartment echoed. No furniture except a mattress leaning against one wall and a folding chair he'd bought online before arriving. We ate pizza sitting on unopened boxes. Hudson looked around. It's kind of depressing. It won't be. You really think so? I nodded. Right now you're looking at boxes. And in a few weeks you'll only see your home. He was quiet for a second. I hope you're right. That evening we walked through the neighborhood. Coffee shops, small bookstores, park 2 blocks away, an old movie theater. Hudson smiled more with every street we explored. I actually like it here. I can tell. I thought everything would feel unfamiliar. And it kind of does. He laughed. But not in a bad way. We found a small bakery just before closing. The owner insisted we take 2 pastries that hadn't sold. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said. After we walked outside, Hudson looked almost emotional. People are nice. Sometimes. I forgot that. The next morning was Monday, Hudson's first day at his new job. He stood in front of the apartment door adjusting the collar of his shirt for the 5th time. You've already fixed that. I know. You look fine. I don't feel fine. You'll survive. He looked at me. What if nobody likes me? They're graphic designers. So? They're probably worrying you'll like them. He laughed. That's a ridiculous thing to say. It made you smile. It did. He grabbed his backpack. I'll be back around 5. I'll be here. The words slipped out naturally. Then we both paused. Because, why would I still be there? My truck was still hundreds of miles away. My vacation had 3 days left. There was no real reason for me to stay. Hudson noticed the silence too. You don't have to wait around all day. I know. I mean, he looked away. Unless you want to, I'll find something to do. He smiled. I'm glad. While Hudson worked, I explored the city. I walked for hours, photographed old buildings with my phone, sat in parks, visited museums. Somewhere around lunchtime, I wandered into a camera store. I stopped in front of an old film camera displayed behind glass. The owner noticed. You shoot? Not really. You look like someone who wants to. I smiled. I used to. He handed me the camera. Felt surprisingly familiar. Comfortable. Like holding something I'd forgotten I missed. Hudson called at exactly 5:12. How was it? He laughed before answering. I think I accidentally made 3 friends. That sounds difficult. It was exhausting. In a good way? In a really good way. I could hear excitement in his voice. Real excitement. They loved my portfolio. I told you they would. My manager seems amazing. Good. And he hesitated. I think I'm going to be okay. I smiled while standing in the middle of the sidewalk. I never really doubted it. I did. I know. That evening we celebrated with takeout. The apartment still had almost nowhere to sit. so we built chairs out of moving boxes. They're surprisingly comfortable. They're surprisingly dangerous. Hudson nearly tipped over laughing. This is definitely the saddest furniture I've ever owned. It's temporary. Everything's temporary. He froze after saying it, then quietly added, I don't think I believed that until this trip. The next morning my alarm went off early. I stared at the ceiling. Today, I was supposed to leave, drive back, pick up my truck, return to work, return to my apartment, return to exactly the life I'd left a week earlier. Hudson was already awake in the kitchen making coffee. You heading out after breakfast? There it was, the question we'd both been avoiding. I guess. He nodded once. Long drive. Yeah. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Neither of us knew what to do with it. Finally Hudson spoke. I don't really know how to say goodbye. I looked into my coffee. I don't either. We loaded my backpack into the hallway. Hudson stood with his hands in his pockets. I guess. He smiled weakly. This is where I thank you again. You already have. I know. But it doesn't feel like enough. It is. He looked around the apartment. I couldn't have done this alone. You did. No. He shook his head. I just drove the car. We both laughed softly. Then the silence returned. Longer this time. Finally I picked up my backpack. I should go. Yeah. Neither of us moved. Neither of us reached for the door. Hudson looked like he wanted to say something. Instead he quietly asked, When do you work again? Monday. So. I still have 2 vacation days. He nodded slowly. I forgot. So did I. Another silence. Then, almost under his breath, Hudson said, I wish you didn't have to leave yet. I looked at him, because the truth was, I didn't want to leave either. Not even a little. I put my backpack down again. Neither of us said anything. Hudson looked at it, then at me, then back at the backpack. I thought you were leaving. I was. He smiled sadly. What changed? I laughed quietly. I made the mistake of imagining the drive home. And it felt empty. He didn't answer, because I don't think he knew what to do with that either. Finally he asked, What are you saying? I took a slow breath. I'm saying I don't think I'm ready for this trip to end. His eyes stayed on mine. I'm not either. We spent the next hour walking through the neighborhood without any destination. Neither of us mentioned my flight home, or my truck, or work. We just walked. Eventually we found ourselves sitting in the same park we'd visited 2 nights earlier. Hudson broke the silence first. I'm scared. I know. No. He shook his head. Not about the job anymore. I waited. I'm scared this was only supposed to be a road trip. I looked at him. And if it was? He smiled weakly. Then I met the most important person I've met in years. His voice became quieter. And he lives halfway across the country. I looked down at the gravel path beneath our feet. I've been thinking the same thing. You have. Every mile. He let out a slow breath. I didn't want to say anything. Neither did I. Because I didn't want you to think I only came because. I stopped. Because what? Because I liked you. Hudson smiled. I would have thought that was a pretty good reason. I laughed. I know. I just didn't want you to feel responsible. He shook his head immediately. Reid. He looked directly at me. You came because you wanted to. I did. And I asked you to stay because I wanted to. Another quiet settled between us. This one wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply honest. We stayed in the park until sunset. At one point Hudson quietly asked, What happens now? I don't know. You don't. I've spent my whole life making safe decisions. And this, I smiled, this has been the least safe decision I've ever made. He laughed. No kidding. But I looked toward the city skyline. It's also been the happiest I've felt in a long time. His smile disappeared. Not because he was upset, because I think the words meant something to him. I've been happy too. That evening we ordered Chinese food and finally unpacked his living room. Not because it needed to be done, because neither of us wanted to sit still. By midnight, there was a bookshelf, a coffee table, 2 lamps. See, I said. You did need the lamps. Hudson laughed. I can't believe you're admitting I was right. Don't get used to it. The next morning my phone rang. It was my boss. You alive? Barely. He laughed. Having fun? I think so. You think? I looked across the apartment. Hudson was assembling a desk while quietly arguing with the instruction manual. I know so. Good. We're surviving without you. I appreciate that. He became quiet. So, yeah. You coming back Monday? There it was. The question. I looked out the window. I don't know. He didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, I figured. You did. You've sounded different every time we've talked. In a bad way? In the happiest way I've ever heard. I smiled. I didn't expect that. Neither did you. No. He laughed. Well. Another pause. Whatever you decide, make sure it's because you're choosing your life, not because you're afraid to change it. After we hung up, I stood in silence for a long time. Hudson noticed. Everything okay? Yeah. You sure? I nodded. My boss just gave me really inconvenient advice. That afternoon we found my truck online, still parked exactly where I'd left it. Hudson looked at the screen. So, you could fly back. I could. Pick it up. I could. And, he looked nervous now. Come back. I looked at him. You'd want that. He actually laughed. I've wanted that since yesterday. Why didn't you say anything? I was trying to be reasonable. How'd that go? It was terrible. 3 weeks later, I was back. Not visiting. Moving. This time my truck was the one packed from bumper to bumper. Hudson stood outside the apartment building waiting for me. When I parked, he walked over smiling. Need help? I thought you'd never ask. Together we carried my boxes upstairs, just like we'd carried his. Only this time, it didn't feel like helping someone move. It felt like coming home. Life didn't magically become perfect. I found a new job. Took longer than I hoped. Hudson's apartment was definitely too small for 2 people's furniture. We spent weeks deciding what stayed and what got donated. He still kept too many books. I still insisted on making coffee every morning. He still bought plants faster than we had windows for them. I still noticed every tiny change in his mood before he said a word. Some evenings we'd walk through the neighborhood and laugh about the motel where my truck had first disappeared from the story. Or the 2 toaster ovens. Or the frying pan he almost cried over. Sometimes we'd drive out to the edge of the city just to watch the sunset from the car. Not because we needed to go anywhere. Because we'd learned something on that highway. Sometimes the destination isn't the thing that changes your life. Sometimes it's the person sitting beside you for every mile. Almost a year after his move, we took another road trip. No deadlines. No moving boxes. No uncertainty. Just the 2 of us. As we crossed the state line where we'd first met, Hudson smiled. Pull over. I did. The old parking lot looked almost exactly the same. Different cars. Same broken pavement. Same endless stretch of highway. Hudson looked at the spot where his tire had blown. It's strange. What is? I thought this was the worst day of my year. And now, he smiled at me. I think it was the luckiest. I laughed. I almost didn't stop. I know. What would have happened? He looked down the empty road for a moment. Then back at me. I would have reached this city. Probably. I would have started my new job. Yeah. I would have unpacked my apartment. And he smiled with the quiet certainty I'd come to know so well. But I would have never met the person who taught me that home isn't always a place. It's sometimes a person. I nodded. I was thinking the same thing. We stood there for another minute before getting back into the truck. The road stretched out in front of us again. Only this time, neither of us was trying to escape a life we'd outgrown. We were simply driving toward whatever came next. Together. 3 years later, people still asked us the same question. So, How did you two meet? Hudson and I would always look at each other first, like we were silently deciding which version of the story to tell. The short one or the real one? Usually Hudson answered. My tire exploded. People laughed. They thought he was joking. Then he'd point at me. And somehow that turned into this. That part was always true. It just left out about 3,000 miles. Our apartment looked completely different now. The moving boxes had long disappeared. The empty walls were covered with Hudson's illustrations. Plants occupied nearly every windowsill. There were books everywhere. Far too many, if you asked me. One more bookshelf. You said that 6 bookshelves ago. I've grown. So has your collection. He smiled. You love it. I tolerate it. You alphabetized them last week. I made a mistake. He laughed. No. You admitted defeat. I eventually bought my first real camera. Not an expensive one. Just one that made me want to go outside. Every Saturday morning I'd disappear for a few hours, wandering through neighborhoods, photographing people, old buildings, rainy streets, and quiet cafes. One afternoon Hudson looked through the newest pictures. You know. What? You're finally doing what 18-year-old Reid wanted. I looked at the camera in my hands. He was right. Some dreams don't disappear. They just wait until you're finally ready to choose them. Hudson loved his job. Not every project. Not every deadline. But the life he'd built. Sometimes I'd walk into his office after work and find sketches covering the desk. He'd look up. I've been staring at this logo for 6 hours. Does it still make sense? No. Then you're done for today. He'd smile. You always know when to interrupt. I've had practice. One evening we decided to clean out the storage closet. Mostly because we couldn't close the door anymore. Hudson pulled out an old cardboard box. I forgot this was here. Inside were the things that had survived the move. A faded road atlas. Receipts from gas stations across 6 states. A motel key card we'd accidentally kept. The notebook he'd been carrying the day I first arrived. He opened it carefully. Between pages of sketches was a folded receipt. My handwriting. My phone number. Written in blue ink. In case the spare gives out. Hudson smiled. I almost threw this away. I'm glad you didn't. He looked at the paper for another moment. You know. What? I never actually kept it because of the tire. I laughed. I figured. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. Later that night we walked to the small park near our apartment. The same one where we'd once sat wondering what happened after the road trip ended. Families were walking dogs. Kids were riding bicycles. The city felt familiar now. Comfortable. Home. Hudson sat down on our favorite bench. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd kept driving that first day? I do. And I would have gone home. He nodded. Probably. I would have worked Monday. Yeah. I would have lived exactly the same life. He looked at me quietly. I think about that too. The flat tire? The decision to ask you to lunch. He smiled. It would have been so easy to just say thanks and leave. But you didn't. No. I was lonely. He laughed softly. I know. I just didn't realize someone else was too. I looked at him. I didn't either. Every anniversary of that first meeting, we drove back to the little diner near the highway. The waitress had changed. The coffee was still terrible. The pancakes were still too big. Hudson always ordered them anyway. Tradition. They're still not good. I know. You complain every year. I know. And yet, they remind me of the best decision I ever made. Sometimes people imagine that life-changing moments feel dramatic. Like music starts playing. Like you instantly know everything is about to change. That isn't how it happened. There wasn't a sign. There wasn't certainty. There wasn't even confidence. There was simply a man standing beside a broken-down hatchback with a flat tire. Another man who almost didn't stop. A conversation over bad coffee. A week on unfamiliar highways. Thousands of ordinary moments that slowly became extraordinary because they were shared. Looking back, it wasn't one big decision that changed our lives. It was 100 small ones, stopping the truck, accepting lunch, answering a phone call, taking vacation, saying stay one more day, choosing to come back, again and again, until there was no more leaving. Hudson reached for my hand as we walked home through the quiet evening streets. No words, none were needed. Some journeys end at an address. Ours ended with something much harder to find. We'd both crossed an entire country looking for a new beginning. Neither of us realized the beginning had been waiting on the side of the road all along.